You've done this. Forgiven yourself in half a second for the exact thing that made your blood boil when someone else did it. You didn't feel like a hypocrite. You felt justified. That gap, what you excuse in yourself but never in anyone else, is what this video is about. Here's what's actually happening underneath it. The easy explanation is that hypocrites are just worse people, but that's not really what the research says. It's closer to a default setting in how every mind protects itself, yours included. So let's look at how it actually works. Start small. You're 11 minutes late to meet a friend. A stalled truck, a light that wouldn't change, nothing you could control. Now flip it. That same friend walks in 11 minutes late to meet you. What's the first thought? Rarely, traffic must have been bad for them too. Usually something closer to, they don't respect my time. Same behavior, two different stories. In 1977, a Stanford psychologist named Lee Ross gave this pattern a name, the fundamental attribution error. Translation, you explain your own behavior with the situation, the traffic, the deadline, the rough night of sleep, but you explain someone else's identical behavior with their character. They're careless. That's who they are. It's not that you're deliberately letting yourself off easy. You're working from two different piles of evidence. With your own actions, you have the whole file, every reason, every ounce of context. With everyone else, all you're ever handed is the outcome. A mind that hates a gap in the story fills the missing pages in with the cheapest explanation available, their personality. Here's where it gets a little more uncomfortable. Maybe you're already thinking, okay, but I do try to consider other people's circumstances. Notice what that thought just did. It checked itself by looking inward, at intention. That's the next layer underneath hypocrisy. A Princeton psychologist named Emily Pronin spent years studying what she called the bias blind spot, the finding that almost everyone can spot bias clearly in other people while staying confident they don't carry much of it themselves. In her studies, people read a list of common biases and answered one question: who's more likely to fall for this, you or the average person? Again and again, the average person came out looking far more biased. Here's why. When you judge yourself, you have access to your intentions, the private reasoning that only plays out in your own head. When you judge someone else, all you have is their behavior. So without noticing you've switched rulers, you grade yourself on what you meant to do and everyone else on what they actually did. There's a version of this that shows up somewhere sneakier than judgment. It shows up in permission. In 2001, two Princeton researchers, Benoit Monin and Dale Miller, ran a study that's still cited constantly. They gave people a chance to publicly disagree with a blatantly sexist statement, quietly establishing them as clearly not prejudiced. Minutes later, in an unrelated task, those same people were asked to help pick a candidate for a stereotypically male job, and the ones who'd just proven their fairness were now more willing to favor the man. Doing one visible good thing didn't make people more consistent. It gave them permission to relax. Psychologists call this moral licensing, and once you know the term, you start noticing it everywhere. The person who spends a whole morning being warm, holding doors, tipping generously, complimenting a stranger's dog, and by evening feels entitled to snap at the people closest to them over something small. Sound familiar? Nobody consciously decides that. It happens underneath thought, as if kindness had a budget and the rest of the day was running on credit. This probably sounds like something the mind builds on purpose, but one experiment on the exact thing this video is named after suggests something stranger is happening underneath it. Two researchers at Northeastern University, Pier Carlo Valdezolo and David DeSteno, study what they literally call moral hypocrisy, judging your own wrongdoing more gently than the identical wrongdoing in someone else. In one small, almost petty experiment, participants were told there were two tasks to split with a partner, one short and easy, one long and dull, and a computer could randomly decide who got which. Almost 9 out of every 10 people skipped that option and assigned themselves the easy task anyway. Afterward, everyone rated how fair that decision was. The people who'd picked the easy task for themselves called their own choice reasonably fair. A separate group who only watched someone else do the exact same thing called it clearly unfair. Then came the twist. Researchers gave some participants a short string of numbers to hold in memory while making that same fairness judgment, just enough mental effort to keep part of the brain occupied. Under that small bit of load, the hypocrisy nearly vanished. The same people who'd taken the easy task for themselves suddenly judged their own choice just as harshly as anyone else's. Sit with that, because it flips the obvious assumption. The honest, consistent reaction, "this is unfair whether I did it or someone else did," appears to be the mind's first response. What disappears under pressure isn't your conscience, it's your ability to talk yourself out of hearing it. Letting yourself off the hook takes spare mental energy, which might explain why you're often the shortest-tempered, least forgiving of your own contradictions on exactly the days you're most drained. Not because exhaustion makes you worse, but because it strips away the story you usually have just enough energy left to tell. Put these together, and hypocrisy stops looking like a flaw certain people have and others don't. It looks more like the natural output of a mind with full access to its own reasons, only partial access to everyone else's, a running tally of moral credit it keeps spending, and, on a good day, just enough spare capacity left to write itself a decent excuse. None of that means your standards don't matter, or that calling out unfairness is pointless because everyone does it anyway. The target was never zero hypocrisy. A mind with zero hypocrisy would need to know everyone else's reasons as clearly as it knows its own, and no mind gets that. The more honest question is what happens in the half second after you notice the gap, the moment you catch yourself excusing in you what you'd never excuse in anyone else. Some people defend that moment before it even finishes registering. Others let it sit there, a little uncomfortable, and actually look at it. That option isn't automatic, and it isn't natural. It's really the only part of this whole pattern you ever had a say in. If any part of this made you think of someone, or more honestly, of yourself, that's what this channel is for. Subscribe for more of this, and I'll see you in the next one.